Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin McGrace, and this is the KMG show for Wednesday, June the 23rd, 2021. Let's start with some breaking news. This is from the U.S. Sun. John McAfee had a whacked tattoo and once claimed that if he was ever found dead by suicide, that he did not kill himself. He posted a picture of the tattoo in a 2019 tweet, which he accused the U.S. officials of sending him threats in subtle messages. The 75-year-old antivirus pioneer reportedly killed himself on Wednesday, just hours after it was announced he would be extradited to the United States. He is reported to have taken his own life in prison in Barcelona. In a tweet 2 years ago, McAfee appeared to show off a tattoo reading "whacked," getting subtle messages from U.S. officials saying, in effect, "We're coming for you, McAfee. We're going to kill you or yourself. I got a tattoo today just in case. If I didn't suicide myself, I didn't. I was whacked. Check my right arm." In another tweet from only 8 months ago, McAfee also compared himself to Jeffrey Epstein, who was also found dead from an apparent suicide in his prison cell. "I am content in here. I have friends. The food is good. All is well," he wrote in October 2020. "Know that if I hang myself a la Epstein, it will be no fault of mine." McAfee's death was reported just hours after Spain's national court approved his extradition to the U.S., where he is wanted on tax-related criminal charges that carried a prison sentence of up to 30 years. The decision could have been appealed, and the final extradition would have been needed to be approved by the Spanish cabinet. McAfee sold his antivirus company to Intel in 2011 for $7.7 billion. He developed an early internet security software and has been sought by authorities in the U.S. and Belize in the past. He was arrested October 3rd last year at El Prat Airport in Spain as he was about to flee the country to Turkey. That same month, McAfee was charged in Tennessee with evading taxes and failing to report income made from promoting cryptocurrencies while he did consulting work, made speaking engagements, and sold the rights to his life story for a documentary. So these things come in threes, right? So I suppose if Bill Gates is suddenly found dead, I guess we can consider the conspiracy to be confirmed. But wait, what's this? From CNBC. Warren Buffett gives away another $4.1 billion, resigns as trustee at Gates Foundation. Yes, this year's donation marked the halfway point for the 90-year-old Oracle of Omaha, who in 2006 pledged to give away all of his Berkshire shares through annual gifts to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others. Buffett's resignation as Gates Foundation trustee comes as the charitable organization faces a tumultuous time with the divorce of its two founders. For years, I've been a trustee, an inactive trustee, at that of only one recipient of my funds, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I am not resigning from that post, just as I have done at all corporate boards other than Berkshire's. Bill Gates, co-founder and former CEO of Microsoft, and his wife, Melinda French Gates. She was Melinda Gates for decades, and then suddenly she becomes Melinda French Gates. It's funny how that happens. They announced their divorce in May. The couple, along with Buffett, were creators of the Giving Pledge. So it turns out we find, well, this is what happens in celebrity divorces. If the divorce is expected to be contentious and there's a lot of money involved, then each side starts leaking damaging information or rumors or lies about the other. So Bill and Melinda announced their divorce, and suddenly we find that Bill Gates was a really close pal of Jeffrey Epstein. Why would Bill Gates have been a really close pal of Jeff Epstein? I understand that Jeff gave really slap-up dinners, in his fabulous Manhattan pad, but I shouldn't think that Bill Gates wants for fine food if that's what he likes to eat. Jeff Epstein, was he involved in the tech world? No, not really. But Jeff Epstein had one advantage for any rich man who wanted to get close to him, which is that Jeff Epstein had hot and cold running chicks available, and many of them, and they were quite young. That's not making any accusations against Bill Gates, but as I say, it is curious that these two men were such close friends. Prince Andrew, yes, I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Gamion, Random Number Generator, Anrun, Dan Ellison, and just plain Dan. Gates, yeah, okay. Let's talk about Macy Gray. I don't know how many of you know who Macy Gray is. She was a big deal in the pop world in the late 90s and early 2000s. She hasn't had a record that is charted in the Billboard 200 for about a decade, but she is still famous. I noticed that I went through her Wikipedia entry, and it appears to have been stripped of many things that are interesting about her. Specifically, that she is crazy as a loon. Let's see. What do we have on that? We have a story from HuffPost in 2014, Macy Gray on her drug use and reaction to fame. Apparently, she says, my drug use started as a result of being on tour. My crew was from England. All they did was smoke hash all day, and they knew where to get the good ecstasy. So you start playing with stuff, and then suddenly it's like a crutch. I actually will admit this. I used to do press with my glasses on because I'd be sitting there falling asleep. Literally, they'd be talking to me, and I'd be asleep. Then they would be like, she's an enigma. She doesn't answer anyone's questions. But when you ask her a question, she just stares. She's very intense, but I would be asleep. And we have a story from the Daily Mail from July 2019. Macy Gray sparks concern after saying she's a vampire during erratic Lorraine interview months after rebuffing claims that something was wrong during loose women chat. Macy's bizarre behavior sparked concern among fans following her appearance. The erratic appearances come months after a similar interview in November. She claimed that she was a vampire and wants to bite people before insisting she won't because it's illegal. Was that ever stopped any vampires before? I would have thought that's part of the appeal. After watching the program, fans of the show took to Twitter to air their worries over her car crash appearance, which left them feeling concerned for her. One fan appeared to suggest the chat was a bad idea, writing on social media, I'm not sure this Lorraine Kelly interview with Macy Gray was such a great idea. One shocked fan wrote, Jesus, Macy Gray is off her head. Maybe in the interview, Lorraine getting ready watching this and can't believe what I am seeing. During the chat, Macy said, I'm a vampire. I need a blood transfusion. I just want to bite people, but that's illegal. Maybe don't do that, Lorraine suggested. And there are several pictures from ITV of Macy Gray looking, as Hank Hill said, hopped up on Goofenthal. Not there, really. But it turns out that Macy Gray is America's new Betsy Ross. She has written in Market Watch, for Juneteenth, America needs a new flag to the abolishment of slavery. No, that's not what the purpose of the Confederate battle flag was, but never mind. It's just recently tired. We don't see it much anymore. However, on the 6th, when the stormers rained on the nation's most precious hut, I'll repeat that. On the 6th, when the stormers, you mean like stormtroopers, rained on the nation's most precious hut, I presumably mean she means the Capitol building. The memo was a waving old glory. The memo was received. The American flag is its replacement. President Biden, Madame Harris, and members of Congress, the American flag has been hijacked as code for a specific belief. God bless those believers, they can have it. Like the Confederate, it is tattered, dated, divisive, and incorrect. It no longer represents democracy and freedom. Yes, well, as mentioned before, America was not founded as a democracy, but a republic, if you can keep it. It no longer represents all of us. It's not fair to be forced to honor it. No one is forcing Macy Gray or anyone else to honor the Stars and Stripes. Incorrect, she continues. Let's look at the stars. There are 50 where there should be 52. DC and Puerto Rico have been lobbying for statehood for decades. Both have been denied, since statehood would allow each territory's elected officials seats in the House. Well, not just the House, but the Senate as well. Assuming DC reps would be African American and Puerto Rican reps would be Hispanic, the ultimate assumption is that these elected officials would be Democratic. That alone is racist. On to the stripes. The Smithsonian documents that the white stripes, and white is put in scare quotes for some reason, represent purity and innocence. America is great. It is beautiful. Pure, it ain't. It is broken and in pieces. What if the stripes were off-white? What if there were 52 stars to include DC and Puerto Rico? What if the stars were the colors of all of us, your skin tone and mine, like the melanin scale? The blue square represents vigilance and perseverance, and the red stripes stand for valor. America is all of those things. So what if those elements on the flag remained? What if the flag looked like this? Yes, and it looks very much like you'd imagine, only the red stripes, which are not really red anymore, are washed out. This looks like something a child would have made. But wait a minute, let's go back a bit. Pure it ain't, Macy Gray says about America. It is broken and in pieces. It doesn't sound very good. But wait, later, the blue square represents vigilance and perseverance, and the red stripes stand for valor. America is all of those things. Well, is it all of those things, or is it broken and in pieces? As she continues, in 1959, 17-year-old Bob Heft designed the current flag for a school project when there were only 48 states. Hawaii and Alaska were up for statehood, and Bob had a hunch they'd get the nod. He crafted a new flag with 50 stars for the then future because things had changed. 62 years later, in 2021, we have changed, and it's time for a reset, a transformation, one that represents all states and all of us. I don't really think that it was particularly difficult for Bob Heft to add 2 more stars to the blue rectangle at the top left of the American flag. But no, this may seem crazy to you. And again, Macy Gray is crazy as a loon. But America is a country where Juneteenth has to become a holiday. What teenth? Juneteenth. What's that? Everyone knows what Juneteenth is. Okay, if you say so. So let's move heaven and earth to make Juneteenth a holiday. I have to say that there don't seem to be any alphabet people on this new Macy Gray designed flag, which strikes me as a bit heteronormative of her. But now that the United States of America is flying the pride flag, the new pride flag, which is more inclusive than the old pride flag, at its embassies around the world, what is to stop the Biden administration from adopting the Macy Gray flag, making her the new Betsy Ross, making her the mother of this new equitable nation? Speaking of Juneteenth, there is no pleasing some people. This is from Hannah Frischberg at the New York Post. An attempt to honor Juneteenth has backfired spectacularly for one Georgia Ikea. An Atlanta branch of the Scandinavian furniture chain has sparked outrage with what employees are calling an intensely problematic menu curated. Is that what happens to menus now? They're curated to celebrate the holiday, which marks the emancipation of the very last enslaved Americans. To honor the perseverance of Black Americans and acknowledge the progress yet to be made, we observe Juneteenth on Saturday, June the 19th, 2021, begins an email which was sent to employees at the branch last week. Look out for a special menu on Saturday, which will include fried chicken, watermelon, mac and cheese, potato salad, collard greens, and candied yams. The selection, including items that have historically been used to demean African Americans through stereotyping, resulted in multiple employees calling out of work in protest, according to a local news channel. You cannot say serving watermelon on Juneteenth is a soul food menu when you don't even know the history. They used to feed slaves watermelon, an anonymous employee told Atlanta's CBS 46. It caused a lot of people to be upset. People actually wanted to quit. People weren't coming back to work. Perhaps that would be addition by subtraction. I presume slaves were fed things like bread and potatoes. So would that be insulting and stereotypical to serve on Juneteenth? Perhaps they just sort of served, plain noodles of some sort without any kind of dressing. As many as 33 workers didn't show up in response, CBS reported, causing the store's manager to apologize via internet email. She said, "I truly apologize. The menu came off offensive," the employee recalled. But this wasn't sufficient for forgiveness. And the worker said the controversy could have been easily avoided if only people of color had been included in the team that chose the menu. None of the co-workers who sat down to create the menu, no one was Black, they added. The following day, the store manager told CBS a new revised menu was released. The updated version included collard greens, cornbread, mashed potatoes, and meatloaf. And Sunday's menu, fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, the employee said. An IKEA spokesperson sent the Post a lengthy statement, which reads in its entirety, "In addition to offering Juneteenth as one of our paid holidays nationally, our IKEA Atlanta store has recognized Juneteenth with our co-workers for the past 4 years. To honor the day, a lunch menu was created with the best of intentions, including recommendations from Black co-workers. We value our co-workers' voices and changed the menu after receiving feedback that the foods that were selected are not reflective of the deeply meaningful traditional foods historically served as part of Juneteenth celebrations. We got it wrong and we sincerely apologize. We are committed to educating ourselves and putting a process in place that will allow us to thoughtfully honor Juneteenth in the future." The spokesperson additionally noted that there were Black co-workers involved in the creation of the menu. Out of respect for their privacy, we cannot go into more detail, and we take this as an important learning and shared responsibility. I've been to the cafeteria at IKEA, and they serve Swedish meatballs and with a kind of sauce, a red sauce, some lingonberry or something like that. Is this stereotypical? Is this offensive to Swedes? I'm sure Swedes eat many other things. But let's look at that menu again. Fried chicken. So fried chicken is used to insult Black people. Famously, Black people love fried chicken. So do lots of other people. If Americans didn't love fried chicken so much, then presumably there wouldn't be so many fried chicken franchises. What, thousands of branches in America? Maybe tens of thousands? Watermelon, lots of people love watermelon, particularly in summer. Mac and cheese, very popular. Potato salad, collard greens, and candied yams. Yes, just the humiliation, the abject humiliation here. It is to weep. Okay, let's go back to the chat. Glib Medley says Epstein offered nubiles for nerds. Oh, Gaminian says I saw Macy Gray at a pharmacy in New York City once. Okay, Glib Medley reckon Macy Gray wouldn't try spraying me with cologne samples, though. Half Galician said she had one hit song, I think, in 2000. I was going through her albums shortly before I started the show, and I think I saw a record there. On one of her albums, I think it was the second of her albums, she had a song which lasted 5 minutes and 40 seconds, which was co-written by 13 people. 13 people. Star Rover says McAfee's legacy is he was a computer security pioneer, and the company he founded continues to prosper. Enron says, I was surprised to see VDAR's Twitter account retweet a link to a Tacky Mag article by David Cole trashing Tucker, called him a liar, and the Revolver January 6th FBI story. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'm going to have more to say about Revolver later. Justin Proto said, is the American flag going to be like the Pride flag, where we get a new iteration every 3 months? Pelpicasso 88, yes, Macy Gray had one big, well, not exactly a chart topper, but I believe it reached number 3 on the single chart. Steve says, imagine an entire population of spoiled, entitled children who can't shut up and whose parents tell you all about them constantly. Yeah, I'm not going to make that joke about George Floyd. Okay. What else do we have? Juneteenth sounds like pidgin English to me, as says Vienna Chronist. Anron says, I've enjoyed my local Ikea cafeteria on occasion. Yeah, how is Juneteenth not offensive? It's an homage to illiteracy. Gamian says, the apologies, the groveling, and the self-flagellation are so nauseating. Of course, in these situations, I always wonder, what if Ikea had said, we gave you the day off, which we didn't have to. We gave you the day off, and we tried to serve foods. We served foods that you are well known to be fond of, and we get this hysterical response and dozens of walkouts. What if Ikea had said, don't let the doorknob hit you in the ass on the way out? Half Galician says they should serve gefilte fish and matzo ball soup. I always like that Fast Car song. That was Tracy Chapman, I believe, Fast Cars. There was a joke at her expense on 30 Rock, which I quite liked. That Tina Fey mentions Tracy Chapman, some sort of feminist thing, and she says, Tracy Chapman, she's a woman, right? You couldn't make that a joke anymore. It was more of an attack on Tucker than Revolver, Kevin, says Anrun. What's this? Raganuth owns Hollywood. How's KMG doing, bro, in his hotel? I'm okay. I'm okay. KMG above a Chinese restaurant. No, there's no restaurant in this hotel. There's no cafe. There's no gift shop. None of that. Joan armor plating. Yes, I see. I'm not the first one to have made that job. Was it Joan, whatever her name is that did Fast Cars? I don't remember. Let's talk about the grid, the electrical grid of the United States of America, which is not in particularly good shape. But nonetheless, Paul Eisenstein writes, at NBC News, Biden wants millions of electric vehicles on the road. Can the power grid handle it? Short answer, no. 4 months after an unexpected ice storm caused much of the Texas power grid to crash, State regulators warned this week that a June heat wave is causing a high number of forced generation outwaves because, of course, does it ever get hot in June in Texas? The twin Texas crises have put the spotlight not only on the Lone Star State, but on the entire U.S. electric grid. And that in turn comes at a time when the energy infrastructure faces growing demand from the electric vehicles expected to roll out by the millions over the course of the coming decade. The U.S. reached the tipping point this year, said Mary Barra, Chairman and CEO of General Motors. Demand for battery electric vehicles is growing at a record pace, spurred in part by the debut of an assortment of new models, but not everyone is convinced she is right. Studies find consumers are still reluctant to buy electric cars due to high costs, lack of a nationwide charging network, and growing concerns about the energy grid. Oh, people go to the gas station and they don't expect to wait very long, do they? Well, I suppose if we are all bullied into switching to electric cars, then Americans will have to get used to long waits. Those are all issues that President Joe Biden aims to address, among other ways, through the proposed infrastructure bill that would set aside $170 billion to directly back the shift to battery electric vehicles. About 10% of that funding is earmarked for a coast-to-coast charging system to rival today's ubiquitous network of gasoline stations. I point out that the ubiquitous network of gasoline stations in the United States was, how can we say, an organic growth. It wasn't the result of a diktat. We need to jam on the accelerator here. That's the best metaphor you could come up with, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Yes, with an emphasis on designing, engineering, producing them domestically. We're going to double down on our R&D and the technologies that will make EVs easier to manufacture, easier to deploy, easier for the American people to access. There are a number of reasons behind the administration's push for battery car technology. There's a need to reduce CO2 emissions in order to meet global warming targets, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's see. Does the word coal appear in this story? No, the word coal does not appear in this story. So I wonder where NBC News thinks that America's electricity comes from. This is from CBS, San Francisco Bay Area. California dodges outages during heat wave, but EV owners push grid capacity. This is datelined Petaluma. Although the record-breaking heat wave eased slightly Friday, California ISO again issued a flex alert, urging Californians to conserve power to relieve stress on the grid. Those conservation efforts went well, and Cal ISO didn't need to initiate power outages. In downtown Petaluma, people were enjoying the warm evening and trying to find ways to cool off. It's just really hot out, and we wanted some ice cream, said Addie from Pennsylvania. At Lala's Creamery, owner Angela Pryor says she relies on every watt of electricity to keep her business running. If the power were to go out, that would be a problem because we have a lot of ice cream waiting to be served. At an electric car charging station, there were several cars parked during the flex alert. EV owners say they try to charge during off-peak hours, but sometimes they have no choice. I have to get back home, so I have to charge it, said Mark Zimmerman. According to fueleconomy.gov, the average electric car uses 30 kilowatt hours to travel 100 miles. That's the same amount an average American home uses per day. As California shifts to electric cars to reduce carbon emissions, it's having an impact on the state's power grid, and the demand is only likely to increase. The demand is expected to go up about 25% by the 2035 deadline, when the state will end the sale of new internal combustion cars. So it seems entirely likely to me that the Biden administration and the state of California are going to crash the electrical grid in order to show the rest of the world just how virtuous they are. So I mentioned before the shocking discovery of 215 bodies of children, some as young as 3, close to a residential school in the city of Kamloops, British Columbia. Now, this was a claim made by the Kamloops Indian Band on May the 28th. They used X-ray technology. Now, what this X-ray technology, what it detects are deformations in the ground. That is to say, it's been turned over. What was the cause of death of these two? Who were these 215 people? Now, 3-year-olds don't go to school. They don't. Who are these people? What was the cause of death? Unless, I don't know, there are axe marks in skulls and the like, we can safely assume that they were not murdered, although murder seems to be the supposition being made by the Canadian media, the Canadian elite. Quite an informative article posted on the invaluable website immigrationwatchcanada.org, and it is called "There Are Much Better Explanations for the 200+ Deaths at Kamloops Indian Residential School." Now, I should make clear, there is no evidence of 200+ deaths at Kamloops Indian Residential School. There is only a claim made, and there's not going to be an exhumation because that would be considered a culturally insensitive. One very important explanation is that Canada had an alarming child mortality rate. In fact, even before 1915, before the Spanish flu epidemic began, 27% of the population died in Canada as young children. One can assume that this number was even higher amongst the native population. And there is a chart attached from Statista.com, child mortality rate under 5 years old in Canada from 1830 to 2020. And the numbers from the 19th century are absolutely shocking. Deaths per 1,000 of the population, we reach a peak in 1830 of about 340 deaths under 5 years old per 1,000. So children dying was absolutely routine. We see the rate falling to 300 by 1900, and then a considerable drop to 1910, and then a considerable rise again, coinciding with the Spanish flu, and then a pretty severe drop, such that the current number is pretty close to 0. This has never, to my knowledge, been discussed during all the hysteria about Canada's residential schools. Before the invention of penicillin, before the invention of antibiotics, people would catch some sort of infection and they would die. As simple as that. Also, all manner of other kinds of deaths, accidental deaths, people freezing to death. Canada is a very cold country. But again, this bizarre assumption, this insulting suggestion that the priests who ran the residential schools made a habit of murdering their charges. Another explanation is that the Spanish flu, which was rampant in the town of Kamloops, has spread to the Kamloops Indian Residential School. According to a news article published last week, the Spanish flu had by 1918 infiltrated the small town of Kamloops, which had about 4,000 people at that time. There, over the last 2 weeks of June 2021, Canadian radio and television have been going hysterical over the discovery of 200+ bodies of Indian children at Kamloops Indian Residential School. As any sane person can see, the hysteria is completely uninformed. Almost all of the explanations given by the hysterical media imply that the children were murdered by Catholic supervisors at the residential school. Where is the evidence for this? There is none. The overwhelming point is that the accusation is blatantly defamatory and that it has already led to the burning down of 2 Catholic churches in southern BC and the vandalism of Catholic churches in other locations. Who are the defamers? Obviously, it is Canada's media, particularly the CBC. We found 4 much more logical explanations for the deaths. One explanation is that for a number of reasons, all of Canada had an alarming child mortality rate at the time of residential schools. In other words, non-Indian children died in very high numbers all across Canada. Most of these children are now buried in Christian cemeteries, Catholic and other denominations. If skeptics want to unearth bodies to prove that point, they can go to non-Indian children's graves all across Canada. There are at least tens of thousands of children's bodies that could be unearthed. What about going after the churches that the parents and children attended? What about blaming God for all the deaths? Do hysterical Canadians want to blame the churches that stand beside the non-Indian children's graves for the children's death? The child mortality rate was very high in the early 1800s and remained high into the early 1900s. Some of those reasons are biological and some are immigration related. Another explanation is that Canada's lazy, biased media, particularly the hysterical, pot-headed CBC, has suppressed important facts and created a false reality which many Canadians have been deceived and socially pressured into accepting. In fact, many Canadians have been convinced that looking for more believable explanations is wrong. That false reality fits with the CBC and private media's perverted mission to portray Canada's 400-plus year history as a time of endless crimes. A fourth explanation for the 200-plus graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School is the 1890 epidemic of Asiatic Russian flu, and later epidemics probably had similar effects on the town and on the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Yes, as I say, you can find this and many other valuable articles at immigrationwatchcanada.org. But the onslaught continues. Aaron Wary writes at CBC News, "The news from Kamloops shook this country. Will it change anything?" Canadians are waking up, Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde told Rosemary Barton Live this weekend. Governments are waking up. That awakening is overdue. This is ostensibly a news report and not an opinion piece, but no, that awakening is overdue. By no means should it have taken the reported discovery of the remains of 215 children on the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia, to make people face up to the injustices of the past and the need for reconciliation in the present. Reconciliation in the Canadian context means more money for the programs and endless groveling apologies. Kamloops appears to have left a particularly deep impression on Canadians, more so than many other recent events. The question is how that affects the political debate going forward. Awareness of what happened in Kamloops is widespread. 77% of respondents to a recent poll said they were very familiar or somewhat familiar with the reports of human remains. That level of impact vastly exceeds what the polling company found in years past when asked about other major tragedies. Well, there's a reason for that, and it's called manufactured consent. That since May the 28th, the news media in Canada has gone completely berserk, presenting this discovery, which is not proved, again, as the greatest atrocity or the greatest tragedy in Canadian history. Oh, yes. Aaron O'Toole, the hapless leader of Canada's Conservative Party, has decided that he is a patriot now, despite all of the groveling that he has done over Kamloops. This is a story, again, from John Paul Tasker at CBC. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole said today he's troubled by the cancellation of Canada Day celebrations in some municipalities and accused what he called a small group of activist voices of continually talking down the country rather than acknowledging its many successes. In a speech at the final Conservative caucus meeting before the House of Commons goes on its summer break, O'Toole said that while Canada's history is littered with injustice and wrongdoing, that doesn't justify canceling the nation's birthday, a time to give thanks for living in the greatest country in the world. Yes, apparently Canada is systemically racist, that it is white supremacist, but it is also somehow the greatest country in the world. I don't know how O'Toole and others like him think that they can get away with that. O'Toole said that the recent Kamloops residential school discovery is very troubling and dreadful. He called it evidence of the grave injustices committed against Indigenous peoples. But the reported discovery of these remains shouldn't lead cities like Victoria, that's where I live, Penticton, BC, and La Ronge, Saskatchewan, to do away with the July 1st festivities altogether. It was a couple of years ago when, in the dead of night or close to it, the statue of John A. Macdonald, which had stood outside of Victoria City Hall for decades, was taken away. Victoria is probably the leftiest city in Canada. What could I compare it to? Berkeley, California, Portland, Oregon, Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's in that league. I can't stay silent when people want to cancel Canada Day. I'm very proud to be a Canadian. I know most people are as well. We are not a perfect country. No country is. There is no place on this planet whose history can withstand close scrutiny. But there is a difference between acknowledging where we've fallen short and always tearing the country down. He said July the 1st should be a day when citizens rededicate themselves to Canada and tackle the challenges and inequalities that our country faces. It's time to build Canada up. So what Aaron O'Toole wants is a Canada Day in which we have a conversation. That is to say, we are lectured on how wicked Canada is, and here are the things that we need to do in order to bring about equity. While some cities have opted out, the federal government is pressing ahead with an elaborate 2-hour virtual show to celebrate the 154th anniversary of Confederation Canadian Heritage. The department responsible for the National Day has compiled a celebration kit to help people celebrate at home while most of the country remains under COVID-19 related restrictions on gatherings. But some members of the Prime Minister's cabinet are not in a celebratory mood. Asked about O'Toole's defense of Canada's birthday, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller said July 1st can be a deeply wounding time for some First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people because of the country's history of colonial violence. It isn't a rah-rah time, particularly in my position, he said, of Canada Day. Canada Day is a generic national holiday which has existed since, the 1980s? It used to be called Dominion Day, and Dominion Day has a real meaning because July the 1st, 1867, was when Canada received Dominion or home rule status from the British Empire. But a bare quorum of creeps a few decades ago, I believe it was like 25 or something, decided when no one was paying any attention, no, we're going to call it Canada Day because we can't have that word Dominion in our national holiday because that sounds kind of colonial, you know? The I Don't Know More movement, a group of Indigenous rights activists, said Canada Day must be cancelled, quote, to honor all the lives lost to the Canadian state, Indigenous lives, Black lives, migrant lives, women, trans, and Two-Spirit lives. Canada remains a country that has built its foundation on the erasure and genocide of Indigenous nations, including children. It's kind of funny how the number of Indians in Canada, both absolute and as a percentage of the population, continues to increase. A funny kind of genocide, that is. Now, this is a funny story. We are told that Native Indians and Blacks and others are racialized. Well, who racialized them? Is it possible that they racialized themselves? Another story from the CBC by Amanda Pfeffer and Michelle Allen. Award-winning Queen's University professor questioned over Indigenous identity claim. Indigenous groups questioned Professor Bob Lovelace's heritage. He is an award-winning and influential Algonquin rights activist and professor at Queen's, who faces mounting scrutiny over the legitimacy of his claim of Indigenous identity. A CBC News investigation, however, has revealed questions about Lovelace's Indigenous claims. Earlier this month, an anonymous report circled online alleging 6 people connected to Queen's, including Lovelace, made false claims about their Indigenous heritage. Shortly after its publication, the university strongly rejected the report's allegations. That rejection was then met by an open letter signed by almost 100 Indigenous academics calling on the university to examine the potential harm of misrepresentation among faculty and staff. The letter articulated the thinking behind a growing movement among Canadian Indigenous leaders and scholars that demand universities and other public institutions reserve positions and grants earmarked for Indigenous people. They say people with questionable Indigenous heritage should not hold those positions of influence because it undermines Indigenous autonomy and authority overall. The letter also said that membership in Indigenous communities is a matter of integrity and reciprocity, and that unilateral claims to these communities cast their legal order and protocols as insufficient, primitive, or backwards, and are a continued act of racism towards nations and societies Canada has violated repeatedly since European contact. The letter also rejected the legitimacy of Lovelace's adopted Ardoch Algonquin First Nation, where he once sat as chief, adding membership is based on distant root ancestors, some of whom weren't even Algonquin. Wendy Jocko, chief of the Algonquins of the Pitawakanagan First Nation, says Ardoch is not a First Nation and includes people who do not meet any of the criteria for belonging to the Algonquin Nation. We're getting into pretty problematic racial territory here. I'm reminded that back in the 1980s, there was a paper released by the federal government suggesting that benefits given to Native Indians in Canada be restricted to those who were at least 25% Indian by blood. And the howls could be heard from space, so this was quickly dropped. We have this group of people in Canada called Métis, who used to be called mixed blood, who were given full rights with Indians by Supreme Court a few years ago. Many Métis, perhaps most, have questionable Indian backgrounds, and a great deal of people who are fully certified Indians in Canada are, well, sort of, kind of Indian. I remember during the Oka crisis, when was that? The 1990s? Seeing on television repeatedly one of the leaders of the Indians during the siege was a woman with blonde hair and green eyes. So are these people suggesting that there be some sort of Nuremberg laws for Indigenous people in Canada? As I say, deeply problematic. But then it appears that I might not be able to ask these questions or make these observations soon enough. This is from, I can't pronounce this name, but it's from the National Post. Hang on a second. There we go. Right before the House of Commons breaks for summer, the Liberal government will introduce a new bill tackling hate speech, which could bring back a controversial law under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Justice Minister David Lametti has given notice the government will introduce a new bill dealing with, quote, hate propaganda, hate crimes, and hate speech. Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault has been working on a new online harms bill with Justice and other ministries, although government spokespeople declined to say Tuesday whether that bill is the legislation that will be tabled by Lametti. One possibility is that Lametti's bill could leave out online regulation and focus only on changes to hate speech law the government consulted on last year, even though it includes bringing back a civil remedy for hate speech. The bill still stands to garner much opposition. Guilbeault said that this bill will be even more contentious than Broadcasting Bill C-10. That legislation finally passed the House of Commons in the early hours of Tuesday morning after nearly 2 months of concern about its impact on free expression. Now, this is going to be controversial. People think that C-10 was controversial. Wait till we table this legislation. Guilbeault said at an appearance at the Banff World Media Festival. 24-hour takedowns for illegal content. And it used to be the law in Canada, and apparently it's now going to be the law again. Well, let me just read this here. Under Section 13, which may be reinstated, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal could issue cease and desist orders and impose fines of up to $10,000 in response to complaints from individuals about matters likely to expose them to hatred or contempt for the reason of those individuals being identifiable on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. So I suppose if I were to make fun of Jazz Jennings, as I did yesterday, I could be whacked twice. One, because she is a trans person, and two, because, well, you can't make fun of physical appearance, physical characteristics, i.e. she is fat. So under these weasel words, there is literally no speech which could not be considered illegal in some way. Even reporting crimes like that shooting in Rexdale, Ontario, reading a list of names of people who have been shot to death in the Toronto area. What do all of these names have in common? Talking about ethnic gangs. Well, there have been some brave reporters like Kim Bolan of the Vancouver Sun who have been doing this for years, but every one of her stories about ethnic gangs was illegal under Section 13 and may soon be illegal again. Another amusing thing about Section 13 is there was this one man who worked in the hate crimes bureaucracy for the federal government who initiated almost all the claims, claiming these stories were offensive to him personally. Yes, such is freedom in Canada. Let's go back to the chat. Clown Velk says, thank you, Kevin, for your erudition on the matter of Bonapartism. Very interesting. My pleasure. Don Willis says, defend the Constitution. It defends you. Dan calls it the Hurt Feelings Act of 2021. Jim Edwards says, I could get banned for making fun of KMG's teeth in that regard. Perhaps. Perhaps. Pelcasso 88 says, I guess I have to stop with the Schumer-Durham jokes. In the U.S., Indian tribes have a blood heritage standard for membership that varies from a trace to 1/4. That's from Star Rover. Very Nuremberg-esque, is it not? Brandon Smith says, being conquered is the ultimate victimhood and, more important, the guarantor of perpetual access to Gibbs. Steve says, as a Neanderthal American, I find this problematic. Vienna Chronist says, Homo sapiens from Africa did the same to the Neanderthals as the Europeans did to the Indians. I'll point out again that slavery, torture, and genocide were as the rising and setting sun to Indians before and after the Europeans showed up. That is to say, endemic, matter of fact, quotidian. Okay. Biden starts his campaign for gun confiscation today, says Don Willis. Links all violent acts with gun dealers, 2A people, gun dealers, gun manufacturers, and gun owners. Well, as many people have pointed out, there are places in America with exceedingly stringent gun control laws, and somehow bad guys continue to get a hold of guns. Now we're told, it's sort of like, biological Fukushima. Oh my God, people are going to be able to print guns soon enough. Someone is talking up the Trabant. Oi, that was one ugly car. Okay, so let's get back to it here. And I want to talk, let's talk about Karens. This is from Gabriel Keane at the National File. An upcoming liberal horror film that attempts to capitalize on ancient internet memes about fictional white women named Karen, who call the police on black people, has received intense criticism and mockery from the black community, primarily for being a Get Out ripoff that amounts to nothing more than an incredibly cringe blaxploitation flick. I thought that Get Out was incredibly cringe blaxploitation flick, but that was just me. In the trailer for Karen, the titular character is seen engaging in deeply depraved and bigoted behavior, such as committing microaggressions informing neighbors where to leave their trash cans after pickup, and owning a Confederate flag soap dispenser. Her victims, an upper-middle-class heterosexual black couple who are smarter and better looking than Karen, recoil in horror as she asks them to lower their conversation volume in restaurants. The culmination of the movie appears to involve Karen calling the police on black people and chasing them around with a gun while spouting off goofy one-liners such as bad things happen to people that don't comply. The mandatory Hollywood trope of the white female Karen character secretly being sexually infatuated with a black male character also appears to figure heavily into the plot, as do racist police officers with stereotypical Southern accents. Actor Taryn Manning spoke highly of her role as Karen. Just let me confirm this. About this woman. Hang on. She has a very long Wikipedia entry. Very, very long. Surprisingly long. Taryn Manning. Yes, that is the woman I was thinking of. This is the actress that they picked to represent a stereotypical white woman. Oh, dear. Pushing against a string. This is from Jordan Fabian at Bloomberg. Jill Biden pitches shots for reluctant arms in Trump country. First Lady Joe Biden traveled to the U.S. Deep South on Tuesday to encourage COVID-19 vaccinations as the White House seeks to combat widespread hesitance to get shots in areas that are politically hostile to the president. Mississippi and Tennessee, where Biden is traveling, have some of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. They also have some of the highest rates of black people in the country. And all of the surveys have demonstrated that white people are far more likely to want to get vaccinated than both Hispanic people and black people. But, unvaccinated adults who say definitely won't get inoculated are more likely to be Republican and live in rural areas, according to a Kaiser Family Foundation survey released last month. Yeah, I think they're conflating the two groups. But wait for it. Here it comes. The First Lady visited a vaccination site at Jackson State University, a historically black college in the Mississippi capital. Why would you start there? In Nashville, the First Lady was joined by country music star Brad Paisley at a distillery that hosts a pop-up vaccination site. They're not making people drunk before they're giving them the jab, are they? Oh, and here's where it gets really cringe. I don't know whether Brad Paisley will ever live this down. Paisley performed several songs, including a riff on the Dolly Parton song Jolene, urging people to get their shots. Vaccine, 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 vaccine. Don't say no just because you can. Oh, man. Does this man have no shame? Did he get paid for this? And if so, how much? Here's a story from Steve Watson at Summit News. Speaking in Atlanta Tuesday, Atlanta is a city with a lot of black people in it. Are you sensing a trend here? Kamala Harris urged leftist volunteers to go knocking on people's doors and harass them into getting vaccinated, giving advice on what to say if they express resistance. For example, if you knock on the door and someone says they don't have the time to get the vaccine because people are busy, they're just trying to make it through the day, or they say that pharmacies are never open when they do have time, well, let's address that. Because now you can let them know that pharmacies across the country are keeping their doors open for 24 hours on Fridays in June, including today. We need to meet people where they are. Some folks are working 2 jobs, Harris continued, adding, what if they say they can't miss work? Well, you can tell them that there are employers across the country who are offering paid time off for their employees to get vaccinated, and we want to encourage and challenge more employers to do the same. Harris continued, claiming that the government will arrange to get free childcare organized and to get rides to vaccination centers for people, which is easy to say, but likely a bureaucratic nightmare to actually organize. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, admitted that the government has inked a deal to give children free shit in exchange for them taking the shot. We're working with the private sector as well. As you all know, Microsoft is giving away Xboxes at boys and girls clubs. Walgreens is giving out $25 to anyone who gets vaccinated there before July the 4th. Xboxes at boys and girls clubs. How can this possibly not be illegal? It's just ethically disgusting, and it is against the Nuremberg Protocol on such things. But I suppose that is of little interest to our betters. From Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News, a top World Health Organization official says that mask mandates and social distancing should continue indefinitely in order to protect against new variants of COVID-19. The comments were made on Sky News by Special Envoy on COVID for the World Health Organization, Dr. David Nabarro, who suggested that there would be a long list of mutations of the Indian variant, which would, in some cases, evade the protection offered by vaccines. We will go from Delta to Lambda and then on to the other Greek letters. That's inevitable, and some of these variants will be troublesome. Masks forever. Social distancing forever. Social control forever. Of course, there's a Canadian connection to this story. From Tom Blackwell at the National Post, fired Winnipeg lab scientist listed as co-inventor on 2 Chinese government patents. The Federal Public Servants Inventions Act says a government employee cannot file a patent outside the country without the minister's permission. This woman is called Zhangguo Qiu. She is under investigation by the RCMP and is listed as an inventor on 2 patents filed by official Chinese agencies. She was a long-time federal civil servant when the patents were registered in 2017 and 2019 for innovations related to the Ebola and Marburg viruses. Key focuses of her work at Winnipeg's National Microbiology Laboratory. Q's ouster from the lab remains cloaked in mystery and has been the subject of ongoing debate in Parliament as opposition's parties try, largely in vain, to obtain information on why she and her husband, Keding Cheng, another scientist at the lab, were let go. I could be wrong about this, but I'm going to suggest that this couple, who are named Keding and Zhang Guao, were not born in Canada. One would have thought that that might have raised red flags with the Canadian government, but no, that would be racist. From Connor Boyd at the Daily Mail, Chinese scientists have deleted crucial data from the earliest confirmed COVID patients that emerged today amid intense scrutiny about the true origins of the disease. Dozens of test samples from patients in epicenter Wuhan were found to have been wiped from an international database used to track the virus's evolution. The files could have provided vital clues about how the virus originated and how long it had been spreading before the seafood market outbreak in December 2019. The American professor who spotted their deletion and managed to recover some of the data said they suggested COVID was circulating long before China's official timeline. Professor Jesse Bloom, a virologist from the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle, said he believed China had removed the files to obscure their existence. And, okay, this is from Jeff Poor at Breitbart. Tucker Carlson on Tuesday took a swipe at scientists advising Google on COVID-19 during his broadcast's opening monologue. He explained how those scientists supported what had been deemed human engineering and warned it was what science looked like when completely decoupled from wisdom, from decency, and from Christianity. Human engineering. That sounds rather frightening. And again, we get an appearance from Peter Daszak, destroyer of worlds. There is a clip from several years ago that has gone viral just in the last few days, and it has to do with meat eating. That, as you all know, we have to stop eating meat because it's killing the earth. I don't know, farting cows and the like. But the problem is that people like to eat meat because it is delicious and it is good for people. So this scientist called Lau, yes, the Journal of Ethics, Policy and Environment, he wrote a paper which he talks about genetically engineering people so that they become allergic to meat. Yeah. Or that we can engineer smaller people such that they won't need to eat as much. Hubris is waiting for its nemesis. And here's a story from Rob Bailey Miliato, sorry, at the New York Post, proving once again that anti-Pope Francis is a man with no dignity. Pope Francis had a little competition in the superhero department on Wednesday. Whoever suggested that the Pope, any Pope, is a superhero? Spider-Man, yes, Spider-Man gifted the 84-year-old pontiff his very own Marvel Comics character mask as the two living legends shook hands at the end of the weekly audience in the Vatican's San Damaso courtyard. The comic book and blockbuster film icon, dressed head to toe in his signature bodycon red, black, and blue uniform, was seated in the official VIP section of the audience before being introduced to a smiling Pope Francis. Buzzkill alert, the man behind the Spidey mask at the meet and greet, was eventually revealed to be Mattia Villardita, 27, from northern Italy, Reuters reported. This is for all you people who don't understand that Spider-Man is a fictional character. As stated before, apparently I took it pretty well as a child when I was told that Santa Claus didn't exist. When I found out that Superman didn't exist, I was distraught. In my defense, I was probably 4 or 5 years old at the time. Let us go to lockdown skeptics. Oh, let's see, a drug which I am not allowed to mention on this show. Oxford University to trial promising easily available drug as early treatment for a certain disease. Vaccines minister makes bizarre claim that postponing Freedom Day has saved thousands of lives. That would be Nadhim Zalhawi. A Chinese, yes, we've heard that story already. Letter in Telegraph about the damage done to Imperial's alarmist modeling, or done by, rather. And of course, this would be Neil Ferguson, he of Pants Down fame. 60% of Brits fully vaccinated against COVID. New variant alert. Yes, it's just a matter of time until one of these variants becomes a biological Fukushima. Australia to phase out the use of AstraZeneca COVID vaccine due to safety concerns. But I thought there were no safety concerns. I thought that all of the vaccines were equally efficacious and safe. Isn't that what we were told? It's certainly what I was told, what I'm still being told, certainly in Canada. Let's go to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. He has a Substack option now. Virus got a virus, but vaccine don't got a vaccine. We are making a choice with every shot we give. The standard for safety needs to be very high, especially when the benefit is tiny as it is for healthy young people. We aren't meeting it. We aren't even close. James Surowiecki had tweeted, healthy young children and adults are far more likely to end up in the hospital with COVID than they are to get myocarditis from a vaccine, and they're far more likely to transmit the virus to others if they're unvaccinated. Berenson replies, no, they aren't. It looks like the reverse is true. By the way, the awfulness of today's data makes the CDC's Juneteenth delay even more indefensible. young men will wind up hospitalized and seriously ill from vaccines given in the last 5 days. The icing on this cake is that Juneteenth wasn't even Friday. Yes, they canceled an emergency meeting last Friday because of Juneteenth, which was the next day. I suppose that raises the question whether, one day is sufficient for Juneteenth. Shouldn't it be a whole month, a whole season, as the alphabet people have in Canada? Well, we'll work on it. I talk about civilizational collapse, my benediction at the end of every show. Well, here's some more evidence of it from the Washington Post, Griff Witt and Mark Berman. As homicides soar nationwide, mayors see few options for regaining control. The killings rolled over the country like a fast-moving storm, from Savannah to Austin, from Chicago to Cleveland. In 6 hours one night this month, 4 mass shooting attacks. And in their wake, a sober recognition from city leaders that they don't have many options left for curbing a surge in homicides that is traumatizing communities nationwide. We have done almost all we can do, said Van Johnson, mayor of Savannah, Georgia. The tools for fighting back are limited without state and federal help, said Austin Mayor Steve Adler. More money for them programs. Maybe that'll work. If it doesn't work, there's still more money. Maybe all of those places that have been firing police officers, or places where police officers have been quitting in droves, or police officers have effectively stopped doing their job because they're afraid of being sent to prison forever. Perhaps something could be done about that. It's going to get worse, Mayor Frank Jackson of Cleveland said, as the homicide rate climbed through a year of pandemic-imposed shutdowns and civil unrest. Officials held firm to their belief that the rise was driven by that exceptional set of circumstances. As life returned to normal, the theory went, the killings would slow. But even as coronavirus restrictions have been lifted and protests have quieted in recent months, the violence has not subsided. Indeed, it has continued to grow. And now local leaders are grappling with the possibility that they had long feared, that a decades-long era of declining murder rates in America's cities may be over, and that increased killings may be here to stay. There's nothing, said Jackson, that's going to bring this down in the near future. In other words, if your city or your neighborhood becomes a murderous shithole, don't blame me. I'm only the mayor. What can I do about it? Officials and criminal justice experts offer abundant reasons. A nation awash in guns. America was awash with guns 10 years ago, before the murder rate started to spark. Black Lives Matter might have something to do with this. I don't think this is going to come up in this story. A deep mistrust between police departments and the communities they serve, particularly in high poverty areas. Yes, it's poverty that causes people to buy guns and shoot each other. The still painful stress is caused or exacerbated by the pandemic. A cycle of violence that once set in motion is hard to break. The thing about violence is that it builds on itself. It cascades. Princeton sociologist Patrick Sharkey said, each shooting brings the possibility of a reprisal. While the causes may be known, or at least theorized, the solutions are more contested. Even now, there is widespread disagreement over why the homicide rate fell for so long. How to bring it back down has become a subject of vigorous debate, with the issue taking center stage in Tuesday's New York mayoral primary and offering yet another flashpoint in the country's partisan divide. I've been hearing this my whole life. Root causes of poverty. More money for them programs will deal with the root causes of violence. Gun control will deal with the root causes of violence. Well, there has been endless new money, more money for them programs since the 1960s. And more and more gun control. It hasn't made any difference whatsoever. whatsoever. Oh, is there going to be a note of sense in this story? Republicans, along with many police unions and some chiefs, say the real cause of the spiking killings has been an overzealous criminal justice reform movement that has devastated morale in departments and allowed too many criminals to go free. Nowhere do you see recognition that there are some people who cause incredible harm to the community and who unfortunately need to be in jail, said Bill Bratton, a former police commissioner in New York, Los Angeles, and Boston. The argument that reforms are to blame for the increase in homicides doesn't hold water, said the Reverend Mariama White Hammond, a pastor and activist in Boston, which saw homicides rise last year but decline so far in 2021. People don't wake up and go, you know what, I'm going to shoot you because of police reform, said White Hammond, who is also the city's top environmental official, but spoke only in her capacity as a pastor and activist. If you know young people who are engaged in this world, they're not emboldened because of police reform. No, would-be criminals, their behavior is never influenced by the probability of, one, whether they are likely to be arrested, and two, by the probability of whether they're likely to be issued substantial prison time. Because no, they never think of that. Too funny. Let's go back to the chat for a moment. On Juneteenth, plant a Gibson tree, says a glib medley. Isn't that to a reference to a book by Shel Silverstein? If I got his name right, The Giving Tree. 360 billion with a B Biden wants to spend on summer programs for these intercity youth. Yuck. KMG, youths in the community need midnight basketball. When this came up, under Clinton, I thought, I don't understand. Don't these children go to school? Why would they be playing? Why would we want them to play basketball at midnight if they have to go to school the next day? Or was just the assumption that they're just wasting their time at school, that it doesn't matter whether they get enough sleep or it doesn't matter whether they turn up? Don Willis says midnight basketball. That was a real winner. Okay. Yeah, there's some of these things I just can't say. Star Rover says a poll found 10% of Americans think zombies are real. Efficacious or effing fictitious, says Brandon Smith. Don Willis says, ladies and gentlemen, I give you KMG and the lurid patterns. Birkin Sultanov says, a Patriarch Kirill of Russia would never stoop to wash the feet of officially approved immigrants. Quite true. Quite true. Birkin Sultanov says, listening to criminals can help us understand how the oligarchs think. I liked Spider-Man when I was a kid, said Steve. I never read Spider-Man out of the DC comics, but I stopped buying comic books when I was 12 years old. Russia Today had a huge article on the webpage Purge. It says, Birkin Sultanov, I will have to check that out. The overreach is strong. They are radicalizing many independents. Hooray, says Don Willis. And let's talk about incitement. Let's talk about agents provocateurs. Revolver.news has been doing outstanding work on this. Here's their latest story. Last week, Revolver highlighted the disturbing number of key figures in the January 6th Capitol incident who have gone unnamed and unindicted, even as the number of criminal cases federal officials have brought spirals into the hundreds. By now, it is a distinct possibility that many participants in the January 6th riot were associated with the government in some manner, be it as informants or full-blown agents. America's regime media is deeply committed to the narrative of January 6th as a planned insurrection, so that they have flailed desperately to debunk reporting by Revolver as well as Fox's Tucker Carlson tonight. Twitter's neutral aggregators made a cringeworthy clarification that only further bolstered Revolver's claims. Arthur Nix, or Arthur the Hat, had tweeted, "Looks like Twitter and the FBI are big mad at Darren J. Beatty and Tucker Carlson. The amount of cope in this clarification is palpable. Trending in the United States, Tucker Carlson, federal law does not permit cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy, despite a baseless suggestion by Tucker Carlson that some co-conspirators of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol were not charged because they were underground FBI agents." Revolver will continue to report the story of the Capitol incident and the federal government's potential role in instigating it. But there is another reason to suspect federal involvement in January 6th. The federal government has a decades-long history of this exact behavior. Revolver has already reported extensively on the phony plot against Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, where 5 of 18 core plotters were actually connected to the federal government. But there are countless additional incidents all over the country, stretching all the way back to the 1950s. And we shall start with the first World Trade Center bombing. Thanks to 9/11, the 1993 attempt to blow up the WTC is little remembered today. However, at the time, it was one of the most significant terror attacks in U.S. history, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000. If the bomb had succeeded in its intended purpose, toppling the North Tower into the south, it might have claimed tens of thousands of lives. What is even less well known, though, is that the bomb that nearly murdered tens of thousands was built with the help of an FBI informant. Egyptian immigrant Imad Salim was part of Ramzi Youssef's cell during the plotting of the attack. Salim, posing as an ex-Green Beret, was encouraged by the FBI to join the nascent New York Islamic extremist movement. Once Salim had penetrated the cell, instead of using him to thwart an attack, the FBI deliberately let the attack go forward. From the Baltimore Sun, law enforcement officials were told that terrorists were building a bomb that was eventually used to blow up the World Trade Center and planned to thwart them by secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, an informer said. The informer was said to have helped the plotters build the bomb and supply the fake powder, but the plan was called off by an FBI supervisor who had other ideas about how the informer, Imad Salim, should be used. Salim didn't just observe. According to secret tape recordings he made of his own conversations with the FBI, Salim actually helped build the bombs. Speaking with an agent about his expenses last April, Salim said costs were pushed higher by the building of the Trade Center bomb. Told that his expenses had been a little out of the ordinary, he replies in broken English, "I don't think that because we had started already building the bomb, which went off in the World Trade Center." He said the bomb was built by supervision from the Bureau and the district attorney. A few months before the bombing, Salim suspended his undercover work. According to him, it was because he didn't like the danger of wearing a wire. But in 1995, FBI officials said they stopped working with Salim because he repeatedly failed polygraph tests. After the bombing, Salim said he wanted to complain to the FBI's senior leadership. He was told to keep quiet instead. The FBI redeployed Salim as an intelligence asset, having him participate in a second plot to blow up additional targets in the New York City area. But the FBI had Salim do more than observe. They encouraged him to actively fan the flames of extremism, ostensibly to get information. By creating the so-called bootleg tapes, Salim has given ammunition to defense lawyers who argue that he entrapped the 15 defendants charged with conspiring to bomb New York City landmarks. I'm reminded of the infamous plot to blow up the CN Tower in Toronto. We learned that there were 2 RCMP, agents provocateurs, involved, and they'd go on the internet and they would speak in Arabic to other Muslims in the Toronto area. And what their message was, enough talk, we need action. Stop talking. Let's commit some action here. Let's do something really big and destructive. And this was the Canadian federal government that was behind this. Of course, what was to be one of the biggest terror trials in Canadian history by a radical deep green group was called off at the last moment because it was admitted that going ahead with the trial would compromise the identity and the work of someone in the security service in Canada. In other words, the Canadian Security Service was deeply involved in green acts of terror in my country. But let's get back to Revolver. The first annual Muhammad art exhibit and contest in Garland, Texas, was one of the strangest moments in America's long confrontation with Islamic terrorism. Elton Simpson and Nadir Hamid Sufi hoped to kill dozens of unbelievers and achieve a glorious martyrdom. Instead, they managed to kill only themselves, as they were both wounded by off-duty Garland police officer Gregory Stevens just seconds into their attack before being finished off by SWAT officers. The Garland attack was a macabre farce, but it easily could have been a horrifying massacre. Simpson and Sufi were both wearing body armor and were armed with 6 guns and more than 1,500 rounds of ammunition. And if innocents had been killed, it would have been entirely due to the actions of the FBI. When Simpson and Sufi drove to the site of the attack, an FBI agent was in a car right behind them. That informant was dressed in Middle Eastern garb and looked the part so well that local police nearly shot him in the mayhem. That informant also actively abetted the attack. Merely a week before the shooting, when Simpson shared a link about the upcoming cartoon contest, the agent replied by urging him to, quote, tear up Texas, unquote. Simpson replied by saying the agent didn't have to be so overt about what was to be done. After the attack, the FBI claimed that despite their agent being in direct contact with one of the shooters beforehand, the entire thing was a huge coincidence. The agent, they said, was at the Muhammad cartoon contest as part of another infiltration operation and was as surprised as anyone to see the other 2 attackers there. So surprised, apparently, that instead of trying to stop the attackers, he simply fled the scene in a panic. The fact that an FBI agent was in a car directly behind the attackers at the moment they arrived and started their attack was just a huge fluke, worthy of a sitcom like Arrested Development. Of course, if the agent's presence really was innocent, it raises the question of why it was kept a secret from the public for 15 months afterwards and why the FBI has avoided full transparency in the matter to this day. Even now, the agent's name isn't public. Let's move on to Hal Turner. For years, Hal Turner stood out as one of the most inflammatory figures on the American right. Getting his start as a frequent caller to Sean Hannity's radio program, Turner later ran his own online radio program while also participating in local grassroots activism in New Jersey. Routinely, Turner's rhetoric turned violent. He called for American citizens to gun down illegal immigrants and suggested that white people would have to lynch blacks and Hispanics if street crime wasn't brought under control. In 2008, Turner specifically promoted violence against a local school official for introducing a pro-gay and pro-diversity curriculum. Turner also fantasized about violent action against then presidential candidate Barack Obama. Finally, in 2009, Turner called for the murder of 3 federal judges in Chicago. To drive his point home, Turner also posted photos, phone numbers, and work addresses for the 3 judges. Shortly thereafter, he was arrested and charged with making criminal threats to intimidate the judges. But as the trial proceeded, Turner made a stunning revelation. He had been acting on the FBI's orders the whole time. They called him Valhalla, but it was more than a nickname. For more than 5 years, Hal Turner of North Bergen has lived a double life. The public knew him as an ultra-right-wing radio talk show host and internet blogger with an audience of neo-Nazis and white supremacists, attracted to his scorched earth racism and bare knuckles bashing of public figures. An investigation by The Record, based on government documents, emails, court records, and almost 20 hours of jailhouse interviews with Turner, shows that federal authorities made frequent use of Turner in its battle against domestic terrorism. In a memo, the FBI said Turner, quote, has proved highly reliable and is in a unique position to provide vital information on multiple subversive domestic organizations, unquote. The memo went on to say that Turner's statistical accomplishments include over 100 subjects identified, over 10 acts of violence prevented, and multiple subjects arrested. And then there is COINTELPRO. which is the FBI's famous 15-year-long counterintelligence program, best known for spying on Martin Luther King and sending him an anonymous letter encouraging him to commit suicide. COINTELPRO is also notorious for monitoring various anti-Vietnam War protesters and using Stasi-style efforts to embarrass or discredit activists and extremists deemed a threat to American values or stability. But COINTELPRO's activities were far more eclectic than just espionage and smear tactics. The FBI also routinely employed agents provocateurs in ways that clearly paved the way for shenanigans like the Whitmer kidnapping plot. From 1967 through 1970, Tommy Tongye, better known as Tommy the Traveler, hopped around the country posing as a radical member of the Students for a Democratic Society. In fact, Tongye was an FBI informant who persistently urged nonviolent activists to up their game. Two students at Hobart College, acting at Tongye's urging, firebombed a campus ROTC building and were then swiftly arrested and sentenced to several months in prison each. In 1970, an FBI informant burned down a building at the University of Alabama during protests after the Kent State shooting. The arson was then used as a justification to arrest 150 demonstrators. Larry Grathwohl, who joined Bill Ayer's terrorist group, the Weather Underground, turned out to be an FBI infiltrator, but that didn't stop him from planting bombs on the group's behalf. And so it went over and over. And the story also mentions the Herald Square bomber. This is a very dangerous game. I'm reminded in Russian history that the Tsarist regime very aggressively attempted to shut down the anarchists and communists who were attempting to take over Russia. And they did this by infiltrating these organizations. Such was the level of their infiltration, however, and such was the level of, I don't know, what would you say, devotion on behalf of the agents provocateurs, that some people have estimated that by the turn of the century, or by 1900 and later, that most of the terrorist atrocities in Russia were in fact committed by, or were committed at the direction of government infiltrators. Okay, Birkensultanov says Angela Merkel has a former Stasi as cyber hate Tsarina. Aneta Kahan. As many coincidences as in November 2020. Steve says we had to instigate the attack in order to stop the attack. KMG, according to Ogan's Iron, Hal Turner is still around, specializes in stupid fake news like 50K Chinese troops killed in Maine. Yeah, okay. Funny. Nobody noticed. Burton Sulkanoff says Biden didn't allow any journalists from Russia in his press conference in Geneva, while Putin did allow non-Russian media. Star Rover, 1994 World Trade Center bombing allowed the Twin Towers were almost impossible to bring down. All right. Don Willis says the Vegas shooting was an event. Talk to any area nurse or doctor willing to talk, not many. Fear of death. Where were all of these patients? We'll never get truth on that one. No, this event is completely inexplicable. We have no motive whatsoever for this. And frankly, the rate of success of this fellow from his hotel window, it seems quite remarkable. Quite remarkable. Why would someone attempt to kill hundreds or perhaps thousands of people with no apparent motive? Here's a similar article from Kurt Schlichter at Town Hall. That loudmouth troublemaker is an FBI snitch. Back in the day, the meetings of the Communist Party and the KKK were distinguished by two things. First, how similar what was being said was today's Democratic Party dogma. And second, that half the people in the audience and on stage were working for the FBI. But chasing commies and hood-wearing Dems is out of fashion, and things like figuring out the motive behind a guy who drools over Maddow and comes to a softball diamond with a rifle and a list of Republicans is too hard. Today, you are the target because you oppose the regime, and you are a target because you are law-abiding and honest, and at some level, you still cannot imagine your own government has you in its sights merely for trying to work for political change, but it does. Today, it's open season on the administration's political opponents instead of on actual criminals. So there's about a 100% chance that the foul-mouthed idiot who just showed up to your conservative meeting or online in your chat thread talking about doing some damn fool thing has a junior G-man, actually today is probably a junior G non-binary, on his speed dial. Those unfashionable trespassers involved in the minor fracas on Capitol Hill lives Savior Tubinesque insurrection fantasies for someone who wasn't in the middle of a real one, incidentally one fueled by your garbage dem icon Maxine Waters, undoubtedly included a significant number of dudes working for the feds. Oh, the regime's licensed media is denying it now, but like all the other big stories that got walked back later, remember the Tinkle tape, the Russian bounties, and the pangolin slandering Wuhan lab thing, we'll eventually find out the truth about what the DOJ knew, everything, and when it knew it all along. And he has a list of things. Among those huffy bureaucrat defenders who insist our glorious premier investigative agency would never stoop to framing people, I give you FBI agent Kuchtim Seduku, who admitted last week in an ongoing trial in Knoxville that federal agents falsely accused former UTK associate professor Dr. An-Ming Hu of being a Chinese spy, falsely implicated him as an operative for the Chinese military in meetings with Hu's bosses, used false information to put Hu on a federal no-fly list, spurred U.S. Customs agents to seize Hu's computer and phone, and spread word throughout the internal research community that Hu was poisoned, used false information to justify putting a team of agents to spy on Hu and his son, a freshman at UTK, for nearly 2 years, used false information to press Hu to become a spy for the U.S. government. And Loudoun County, Virginia, they don't like critical race theory there. Parents protesting against CRT and a transgender policy are arrested after a Loudoun County, Virginia school board meeting was declared an unlawful assembly. Wasn't it instead mostly a peaceful protest? Loudoun County School Board ended public comment. Anti-critical race theory protesters react. Parents protesting against critical race theory broke into the national anthem when the Loudoun County, Virginia School Board ended public comment because the crowd got too out of hand. Tell us what you think, people, as long as you are 100% in support of what we're doing. If you are not, kindly shut the hell up. I don't know whether this has anything to do with Tucker Carlson and VDARE, but I will press ahead. This is from Big League Politics. Conservative Inc. operatives attempt to sabotage the rising movement to oppose anti-white critical race theory. In recent months, there has been a groundswell of grassroots momentum building in opposition to CRT, the anti-white Marxist curriculum being pushed in school systems nationwide. So naturally, Conservative Inc. is going to co-opt this groundswell and keep Republicans from actually deriding CRT in the strong terms that would actually resonate with the general public. Commentator Karlin Borisenko recently released a video where she argued that explaining CRT helps white nationalists, so conservatives should be softer and more equivocating when describing the phenomenon. Yes, if you look up pictures of this strangely named woman, Karlin, Karlyn, Borisenko, I suppose that's what a modern conservative looks like now. In spite of the extreme unpopularity of her video, Borisenko has doubled down over and over in social media posts, even calling for independent journalist Cassandra Fairbanks to be castigated due to her incessant whining. Borisenko wrote, "In the last month, every time I meet with a group about CRT, there's been at least one person focusing on anti-whiteness. The rhetoric is being pushed into the mainstream because actual white supremacists are attaching themselves to the anti-CRT movement and using it. This is not theoretical. It's happening. And there are major influencers on the right supporting it and parroting the language. I think this is bigger than people think. And I also think that it is dangerous. This should scare everyone. Maybe Joe Biden is right when he says white supremacy is the biggest threat, but I don't think he's right for the right reason. They're focused on nonsense systemic racism. What I'm talking about here is actual racism. It was bound to happen, I suppose. And demanding that the Timcast do the damn thing and just stop. Borisenko is far from alone in making these bizarre arguments. They seem to be coming from conservative Inc. operatives in a coordinated fashion. Podcaster Scott Greer pointed out that these talking points emerged after a recent gathering in Montana hosted by Christopher Rufo, whose work has been cited by former President Donald Trump and has been very influential in the anti-CRT movement. Matthew Peterson had tweeted, "Sad to leave Montana, but not sad about the real Chris Rufo conclave we just concluded to counter state-sanctioned racism. A group of leaders that constitute the true resistance, the real dissenters in this country to the lies and powerful forces that seek to rip us apart." Scott Greer commented, "If you're finding it weird that all the mainstream critics of CRT are suddenly very concerned about white identitarianism, they did just have a meeting last weekend. I guess they agreed on a few messages going forward, and CRT is not anti-white, must be one of them." I wonder who paid for this conclave in Montana. Kimberly Herman had tweeted, "I'm a constitutional lawyer and fight critical race theory because it is unconstitutional, but it is a fight for our culture and our country. I'm honored to be with these great minds." Recent posts by Rufo indicate he lacks the courage to explain that CRT has been constructed as a blood libel against white people for the purposes of justifying violence against them, which very well may result in genocide. Rufo attached a piece from the Washington Post and commented, "It all makes sense now. The Washington Post published a 3,000-word fake hit piece against me because they really want to defend race essentialism and white racial identity. I'm fighting against race supremacy. The Washington Post wants to install it everywhere." Yes, in the same way that Dems are the real racists, that apparently that the Washington Post, the regime media, are the real white supremacists. And this is what the Washington Post had written. What is white racial identity and why is it important? When George Floyd died, people across the United States started to look more critically at how white supremacy affects all of us. In this episode, we talk to mental health experts and scholars about why understanding your whiteness and the ways that white supremacy benefits you is an important part of becoming self-aware. Rufo comments, "The game is that they want to create an essentialized racial category, whiteness, load it with negative connotations, then impose it on individuals through guilt, shame, and school indoctrination. This approach is reductive, manipulative, and malicious. Don't fall for it. The way out of this Kafka trap is to reject the framework of race essentialism, refuse to allow your enemies to impose a hostile identity on you." How is being white a hostile identity, you ass clown? "And define yourself as an individual with a specific heritage that is meaningful to you." Well, some of the things that we've heard from CRT folks, people who believe that white supremacism rules the earth, is that mathematics is racist, that science is racist, that 2 + 2 = 4 is racist, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west is racist. Why? Because white people came up with all these ideas. If white people are the people who are going to be blamed for essentially establishing a regime of, I don't know, reason in the world, then I'm happy enough to be white. Rufo, again from him, Americans of different racial backgrounds can build on a shared culture. Is there really a shared culture anymore, Rufo? I have more in common with a Black American than I do with a Finnish fisherman, and a Black American has more in common with me than with a Congolese farmer. Let's unite around that shared experience. Well, let's consider this claim. In some ways, I have more in common, let's say, with a Black Canadian than I do with a Finnish fisherman. But in other ways, I have more in common with a Finnish fisherman than I do with a Black Canadian. A Finnish fisherman is very definitely a foreigner who speaks a different language, one that is strange to and difficult to English speakers. On the other hand, the Finnish fisherman is very unlikely to call for my people to be eradicated from the face of the earth, to claim that being white is a disease. It is a mental disease. It is a cancer. Is the Finnish fisherman going to say that? No, almost certainly not. The story continues. Rufo suggests that we should all just behave as individuals, and that will prevent the ruthless organized left from encroaching further against our liberties. Big League Politics has reported on how a huge majority of American blacks support CRT, presumably believing that racial supremacy must be imposed upon white people in America in order to wipe away the original sin of slavery. Quote, a new poll has shown that the anti-white Marxist poison known as critical race theory is vehemently unpopular with every group in America except for Democrats and blacks. According to the YouGov Economist poll, 68% of blacks support the extremely anti-American curriculum that is brainwashing children into an inhumane and primitive racial caste system of sorts. These numbers prove that the Black Lives Matter terror uprising is effectively weaponizing diversity in order to rip the nation apart. Yes. So the difficulty that Rufo and this Borisenko women have with the opposition to CRT is that apparently the people who are objecting to it are objecting primarily because of the genocidal notion that have come to be associated with it. Well, that are explicit in its praxis. That they don't want their children, white children, to come home from school depressed or crying because they have been told that they are worthless scum for day after day. These people, and of course this is very much conservatism Inc., that yes, civic nationalism. Come on, if you're not a civic nationalist, you're not an American. Well, it's arguable that civic nationalism didn't really exist in the United States until the 1960s. But in the 1960s, Americans really decided to give civic nationalism the old college try. However difficult it was, however long it took, however much money it would cost, we are going to build an America where people are judged, as the famous saying goes, on the content of the character, not on the color of their skin. But you may have noticed that around a decade ago, that the people went around saying, "Oh yes, I believe with what Dr. King said," and "No, I don't see color." These people began to be denounced as racist because equality is racist. Because equality will legal equality will result in outcomes that are not equal. So equal becomes replaced with equity, which means give us more stuff, because white supremacy is still holding us down also as reparations for all the horrible things you've been doing for 400 years. It pains me to say this, but civic nationalism has absolutely failed everywhere in the Western world, because civic nationalism is met with a belief that is a representation of weakness, and it is. And the harder they push, the more that we will give in. The harder they push, the more we will start saying, well, yeah, it's a good thing that we're going to become a minority in the countries that we founded. Maybe it's a good thing that we disappear from the face of the earth, in a white shift like situation. So yeah, no, civic nationalism, It's been tried, and it has failed. What's going to come after? I don't know. I rather shudder to think, actually. The people behind CRT and conservative ink types who oppose CRT, they have no idea of the consequences of what they are doing. So I'm at Karlin Borisenko's website, where she calls herself the most dangerous knitter alive. It's all so tiresome. Org psychologist, coach, unwoke activist, I broke Woca-Cola. Yes, and this knitting joke is from Dave Rubin. Oh, the anti-white language is coming from white identitarians. Is it now? White identitarians support critical race theory. They win every single time you call it anti-white. CRT wins every single time you call it anti-white. People are seeing what I'm talking about, that this is Bolshevik talk, is what we're getting from Karlin Borisenko. This is the way that Bolsheviks reason and the way that they speak. Let's take a reality which is easily understood and turn it on its head. And we'll insist, for instance, that white identitarians support critical race theory, which is essentially calling for the genocide of white people, because of course white identitarians would support that. And oh yes, yeah, this is funny. White supremacy, heteronormativity, there's no stopping it. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A Florida man was hit with felony charges after leaving tire tracks on an Alphabet People crosswalk, with activists attempting to get authorities to elevate the charges to include defacing a memorial. Alexander Jerich, 20, turned himself into police in Delray Beach, Florida, on Thursday, reports RT. Jerich was seen Monday allegedly pulling onto the intersection in a pickup truck and spinning his rear tires for about 15 seconds, leaving black streaks across the rainbow stripes and sending clouds of smoke into the air. The charges against Jerich were elevated from misdemeanor to felony after authorities said there was evidence of prejudice in his actions. However, this isn't enough for Alphabet People activists who are trying to make police hit Jerich with charges of defacing a memorial after a law passed by Governor Ron DeSantis in April that was intended to protect actual statues and memorials from being torn down by left-wing hate mobs. If Jerich is found to have violated the law, which applies if someone willfully and maliciously defaces, injures, or otherwise damages by any means a memorial historic property, he faces even more severe felony charges. Of course, the idea that a gay flag painted on a road represents a memorial is absurd, but don't expect authorities to see it that way, having been pressured by the mob. Despite the seriousness of the charges against him, Jerich may be thankful that the incident didn't occur in Canada. As we highlighted last year, another man who left tire tracks on a rainbow crosswalk was the subject of a manhunt by West Vancouver police, who treated the incident, which may even have been accidental, as a hate gesture. I suppose this happens everywhere. Victoria used to be a very conservative city, and West Vancouver, which I knew quite well when I was a younger man, was the most conservative electoral district in all of Canada. But now it is one of the most progressive. People move out to places, they ruin places with their politics, and then they move to places, I don't know, which are pretty and have nice weather, and then proceed to ruin that place as well. And they just can't help themselves. Let's see. I'm looking for this David Cole column that was mentioned. Let's see if I can find it. Apparently, it was at VDare. Doesn't? Oh, he writes it tacky, right? Yeah. Okay. See if I can find it there. Okay. Tucker's MAGA millstone. Let me tell you a story about a man named Irv Rubin. Ran something called the Jewish Defense League, the JDL. It was dedicated to battling the enemies of Jewish people, which sometimes meant Arabs, sometimes neo-Nazis, sometimes anti-Zionist Jews, and sometimes Holocaust revisionists. Okay, I remember Irv Rubin. Okay. The dude skated on every legal threat he ever faced: murder charge dropped, solicitation to commit murder tried and acquitted, car bombings, house bombings, extortion, arson, nothing stuck. In 1991, Rubin set his sights on me. He and his goons beat me up a bunch of times, no biggie, chick stick scars. In 98, Rubin put a $25,000 bounty on my head, so I paid him off to leave me alone and abandoned my profession and changed my name. December 2001, Rubin and his main JDL cohort, Earl Krugel, were arrested by the FBI for plotting to blow up a Saudi-backed Culver City mosque as a revenge for 9/11. Okay, the government had an informant, a Jewish kid named Danny Gillis, a U.S. Navy vet who had been Irv Rubin's protege. Why did Gillis become an informant? According to him, beating up David Cole was one thing, but blowing up a West Side mosque, OKC style, was too much. Kids would die and the blowback would sink the JDL for good. The FBI wired Gillis for a number of meetings, most with Krugel, some with Rubin. Rubin died in jail before his case could go to trial, and Krugel took a plea, as the audio tapes proved that he was an active instigator of the plot. Okay, when do we get to Tucker Carlson? Okay. The definition of an informant who's a hero: he informed on someone I hate. The definition of an informant who entraps: he informed on someone I like. Sure, there have been instances in which informants and undercover operatives have been accused of unduly influencing weak-willed or vacillating targets, but that was not the case with Rubin and Krugel. No one could lead them to jack shit. They were stubborn and strong-willed, unlike MAGAs, apparently. Tucker Carlson's new defense of the January 6th rioters is that these weak-minded little man-children were made to storm the Capitol by a mere almost 24 Tuck's figure FBI operatives who forced a crowd as many as 800 MAGAs who possessed no will of their own to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done. The MAGAs were not to blame. A few FBI infiltrators made them do it. Oh, so David Cole has never heard the phrase rabble rouser? He doesn't know why shills are used in auctions, say? First, let's say Tuck's right and the Capitol stormers were so feeble-minded, so easily led, so incapable of independent thought or action that roughly 20 operatives could manipulate 800 of them into marching as one into a trap. Good God, those imbeciles are liabilities. Why act like they have anything of value to contribute? You really want such manipulative simpletons as allies. He bases Tuck bases his FBI did 1/6 trutherism on a report by the Trumpist site Revolver, but being Tuck, he can't even bring himself to faithfully relay what that report actually says. Okay, is this some sort of dispute between David Cole and Daryl Beatty? Tucker Carlson is Al Sharpton with a howdy-doody haircut. Golly. Did Tucker Carlson run over his dog? Maybe you're the mole, Tuck. Yeah, okay, this is where I lose patience. Anyone who's ever been involved in situations like this, where there's government operatives, comes to the conclusion that everyone is the government operative, or the truth is always the opposite of what it appears to be, etc. etc. I don't know. I've been sometimes amused by Cole in the past, although somewhat mystified by his strange career. I don't think I'm going to be spending much time reading him in the future. Let's have a final look at the chat. I will talk about Angelo Codavia's long essay tomorrow. It deserves more time than I was going to give it. Ogan's Iron said marching is one. Some of these people merely walked around. Brecken Sultanov said they went after Alain Sorel in France as well. Rubin used to call into every talk show in LA a real maniac. Brecken Sultanov says they nearly beat Faurisson to death in France. Okay. All right. I don't know. I think that there has to be some sort of personal motivation behind a story like that. Are you interested in the news stories tips? Okay, I don't understand what that means. I'm always interested in news story. In news story tips. Okay, yes, I always am. Best way to get them to me would be to send them via direct message at Twitter. Metal Mike says people are being told not to wear red and white on July the 1st. I will do it anyway. If they would confront me, I'll tell them I am wearing Polish colors. A good one. A good one. Birkin Sultanov says Finns are fine Ural-Baltic folks. So that's it for today. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I'm going to be talking about a Japanese classic movie, Yugetsu. On Friday, I'm going to be talking about a memoir from Peter Kemp. What a very fascinating World War II. It's called No Colors, No Crest. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, which would be received with extreme gratitude and relief at this time, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you were in Canada, donations to this live stream may be made via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.